evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 21st, 2023 special meeting work study session of the Everett Public School Board of Directors. I will now call the meeting to order. Will the secretary please read the roll?
President Hussein.
Present.
Vice President Mitchell. Present. Director Newton.
Present.
Director Nichols. Director Herman. Present.
Thank you. Our first item of business is going to be the adoption of the agenda. And Dr. Saltzman, would you like to introduce tonight's agenda?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and Board of Directors. Good evening to the public and to everybody this evening. This afternoon's agenda contains a segment for the study session for strategic initiative updates, A1A, A2A, and B1B. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saltzman. If all the directors are in agreement, the agenda can be approved by general consent. Very well. The agenda is approved by general consent. We'll now move to section 4.0, which is the beginning of our work study session. I see Mr. Meisner is at the podium.
Thank you. Thank you, President Lassane, directors, and Dr. Saltzman. I know we are all enjoying the spring weather outside. We have extra daylight. It's warm. We see our student athletes out there enjoying and getting prepared. And thank you for your engagement tonight as we provide 3 additional updates on initiatives that collectively are all about multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. So tonight we'll include a few acronyms, and that's our first, multi-tier systems of support. You will hear that as MTSS, and it's a powerful organizational tool, MTSS is, that helps schools plan and organize for intentional supports to maximize student learning. MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, is a very large umbrella, which is why we have 3 initiatives that are working together closely to design and to implement. Those component parts include positive behavior interventions and supports. Another acronym for you that you might hear tonight, that's PBIS, so positive behavior interventions and supports. It includes social emotional learning, or SEL, S-E-L, and it includes a focus on academics. So we have 3 innovative initiatives to go deep on each of those component parts, but because it's all under the large frame of multi-tiered systems of support, they're very interdependent. So our teams have worked closely together, and we wanted to design an update for you tonight that reflected our integrated approach. So it will be helpful for you to think about our update tonight more as one larger update than 3 separate or discrete updates for each of the initiatives. And we have an excellent team here to provide those updates for you. You're going to hear at the beginning updates quickly on each of them. Then Dr. Bowden will go deeper into academics. Dave Peters will go deeper into social emotional learning and positive behavior interventions and supports. And Dr. Scott will provide some summation and synthesis as we near our conclusion. So you will also hear our typical routine of milestones along the way. We have interaction prepared for you, and we will also be sure to leave plenty of time for your comments, questions, and discussion at the end. Okay. With that framing, I'd like to invite Dr. Bowden and Mr. Peters to get us started.
Good evening, President Lassane, Board Directors, Dr. Saltzman, and our community who are listening at home. It's my pleasure tonight to share with you our update of the strategic initiatives A1A, A2A, and B1B. Those are a little bit challenging sometimes if you say it fast. And really where we are at this moment in time. We're sharing these 3 together as a blended presentation because there is such intersectionality within these 3 initiatives here. We know that they're interconnected because for our students, they're interconnected. We know that if a student has a difficult experience at home, that can play into their academics, that can play into their behaviors at school. And so we know that we can provide systemic supports for those students to get them the help that they need to succeed. And we're setting those conditions for our students to help provide for their success. And so when we think about our evening's criteria for success, we would like for you, the board, to hear and see these connections and understand how this helps to create systems of success for our students. And if we're successful tonight, you will have a clear picture of both the work in which we've done with these initiative teams, and you'll also know how they're connected to one another. So the first we'll start with is Initiative B1B, and this is to help shape and fully implement our comprehensive, multidisciplinary, system-wide, multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS. This allows us to increase our staff capacity that meets the needs of each of our learners using best instructional practices. We are on track for this. I'm Shelley Boughton, and I am the executive sponsor, and Mimi Brown is the initiative owner.
Good evening. And I'm Dave Peters, and I am the initiative owner for A1A. And Dr. Peter Scott is the executive sponsor of the strategic initiative, which is to help develop shared practices and trainings, utilizing social emotional learning, restorative practice, and culturally responsive tenets. And the work that is scheduled for this year is currently on track for completion. Then Initiative A2A, the owner for that is Laura Phillips, and Dr. Scott is also the executive sponsor for this strategic initiative, which is to enhance positive behavioral interventions and support, yes, at every school, and integrating, again, social and emotional learning supports for that. And we are also on track for completion for this year for what we have scheduled for this initiative as well.
Excellent. So now we'd like to start with just a brief activity. So at your table, you have 3 cards that are paper clipped to a sheet of paper. You have a green card, a yellow card, and a red card. And what I'd like for you to do is I'm going to give you 30 seconds, and I'd just like for you to read each of the prompts and just think about what each of those prompts mean. And then I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to turn and talk with your elbow partner about maybe something that you might describe for you personally on each of these 3 cards. Okay? Are there questions about what I'm asking you to do?
Like, is there any narrow focus of activity?
It's activity, skills, standards. It could be anything from either personal or work life. Yep.
Okay.
Okay? So I'm going to give you 30 seconds think time, because that think time is important.
30 seconds.
Okay, and if you'd like to turn to your elbow partner and have a brief discussion, we'll give you 2 minutes for that time.
See how we put these up on this, I'm guessing this is like, let's go part in the line, see what starts green. So, do you already have yours that you do independently?
So, yeah, guess what we need that from, okay, just grab it. I'll have this here. I have one.
What's that here? Yes. I think it's a do, I think it's a or.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
so,
So you
yeah.
can speak to any.
So it's interest back there. Knowledgeable, motivated, something like that.
Yeah, and I would say that for me, it's my work. I really can do it. I am training others. I can explain it to them that really works. After almost 7 years. Yeah. Well, it's really my expense report because it's very complicated. That this month I did it by myself, but I've learned some tricks. But still, our expense people came to me and said, Tracy, you can't do this. And I'm like, yes, I can. So I just had to explain it differently. Or my boss just needs to where's your receipt. So it's like, you know, I can most of the time do it, but the support is helpful.
Something you can do independently, but it's always nice to get support.
Yeah.
A broad support. The village.
Yeah.
Okay, about 15 more seconds.
Seconds. How about 30 more seconds? We've got
Do you need 30 more seconds? I can give you 30 more seconds.
So, red. This is my
What was it?
It seems like it changes every year.
Yeah.
Keep asking the same
It's a good
questions.
You don't need that wrong.
Yeah, well, that's why we hire, new hires too.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Yeah, well, I think that it is,
Staff.
we have a financial plan and tax collector, that I can get day-to-day finances, but how to prepare for the next 50 years of my life.
Right.
I do pay somebody to do that.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish, but I choose not to. And it's
Okay.
It's okay if it's not a strike.
Just for the sake of time, I'm going to wrap. And I'm actually going to not ask you to share out what you think might be a tier 1 or a tier 2 or a tier 3 activity for you. But I want you to keep those activities that you discussed in mind, because it's going to help you with another activity. So each of these colors correlates with one of the levels in our pyramid here. And tier 1, that green, they're all layered tiers. So you can see here, it isn't a separate pyramid. It isn't tier 1 in a separate chunk, tier 2 in a separate chunk. You can see those tier 1 supports go all the way through. And that's because tier 1 is about accessing those skills and standards for all students. It's 100% of our students that we want access to that. And when we think about tier 1, we keep in mind that that's the all access, 100%. When we come to tier 2, or the yellow, it correlates with your yellow card, something that you can do, but you need support to be able to do it. And it may not necessarily mean a lot of support, maybe a little bit of a support, it might be more time, duration, or frequency to help you to get better at those things. And the red card correlates to a tier 3 level support, something that you cannot do independently, and you need significant support to be successful with that. I only laugh because I think I heard skateboarding in there somewhere. So you need something, or you might need different instruction, but ultimately our goal is to increase the access to the tier 1 skills and standards. And so if you think about this in the realm of academia, you know that we're talking about helping to find and identify supports that provide access to that good tier 1 instruction.
And then as Dr. Meisner pointed out, one of the reasons why we're combining these 3 initiatives tonight in our conversation is because of the interaction between those 3 categorical areas of academics and behavior and social and emotional well-being. And we all know that if, from a student's perspective, if one of those becomes impacted in some way, that it doesn't take long before one or both of the others also becomes impacted. And so, behavior, for example, it's a form of communication, right? That something's going wrong. And so for PBIS, right, we focus on these pieces for the ultimate result of strengthening or keeping the support for their academics and their well-being too. And so from the lens of a student, when something's going sideways or more than one area starts becoming affected, we want to have systems set up so that the student feels that it's seamless when they're getting support, when they're being toggled between our different areas of support and different staff who can focus on special areas. So whether it's school supports or centrally, that it's an efficient and smooth process from the student's perspective, and that they're not falling through any of the gaps.
So tonight I want to share a little bit of a comparison that I think might actually help set the stage for understanding that the MTSS system that we're talking about is not a static system. It's not one place. So sometimes you may, in previous experiences, you may have heard referral to, oh, that must be a T3 setting or a T1 student, tier 1 or tier 3. And what we're really thinking about is that we're providing tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 supports to students in need, that it isn't a designation for a student. And I want to give you an opportunity to hear my journey of 30 years from 1993 to 2023 and kind of helping you to understand where I might place some of my skills on our pyramid in Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So in 1993, my parents were a big advocate of me doing cooking, practicing. I did a lot of cooking for my family. I was really good at it. I could independently do it. I found recipes, and I was pretty successful. And so I would also actually say, when I have the time to actually prepare meals, it's something I enjoy to do. This is a Tier 1 activity for me. I feel really confident about my cooking ability. My family sometimes agrees, but they feel very confident with I feel confident in this skill set. I can do it really well, and I don't need a lot of support. I might need a little bit here and there, but I'm pretty good at that. So in 1993, a Tier 3 activity for me was the French language. I was a French major at Michigan State University. I had done 4 years in high school. I had traveled to Europe many times. I was relatively fluent in my language, but in 1993, I was taking a full load of French classes, French literature. I could read, write, and speak. I felt really confident about that. I didn't need a lot of support, but I could learn and I could do that well. Now in 2023, because I do not have the opportunity or the practice, my French fluency has really diminished. Now, could I learn French again? Absolutely. If I spent more time or some more frequency engaging in the language practices with that French, I would become fluent fairly easily, but it would take more time and practice to do that. Now, in 1993, I was not very good at public speaking. I needed a lot of support. I went to a very small high school, didn't have lots of opportunities to do public speaking, and so I wasn't very good at it, and I needed a lot of help from my professors when I did presenting and standing in front of my peers. That was really difficult for me. Now, in 2023, because I've had 16 years as a building principal, lots of opportunities as an administrator, my public speaking is actually a skill that I feel pretty confident with. Occasionally, I need to be told to slow it down so I don't talk too fast, but most of the time I feel pretty confident about my public speaking skills. Now, in 1993, I was driving, I think, a pretty old Chevy Blazer, and my father tried to teach me to change the oil and take care of those things, but quite frankly, I'm just not a visual spatial learner, and it took me a long time to master some of those skills. And by the time I mastered those skills, with the development of auto maintenance, I needed a lot of persistence and support. Now I had new cars, and those new cars have newfangled chips and all sorts of stuff. I just really need a lot of support from the owner's manual, from my husband, from the guys at Klein Honda, all of those things to help me make sure that I could do auto maintenance at a high level. It's just not something I'm very good at independently, but it also is something that I can continue to grow and I can get some good support, so I will be able to do it. So one of the things that I want you to think about is your triangle doesn't necessarily have to be static. And you have a sheet in front of you that I'd like to give you a few minutes for you to be able to think about some of those things that you did on your cards and add that to your own triangle. And maybe that's something that you had to practice and practice and practice. Maybe that's something that you needed a lot of support. And maybe that's something that you just feel really confident and continue to grow. So if you could take a look at your triangle and just take a couple of minutes to fill out what might be some things that were Tier 3, and maybe they haven't always been Tier 3. Maybe they were Tier 1 and they got harder. But I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and just go ahead and fill out your triangle. Yeah, if you'd like. Yeah, how about we take a little pause for a question if you have? Sure. Is another 20, 30 seconds sound okay? Okay. I just want to take you back to my triangles really quickly, and I want to give you a little bit of a correlation before we do a stand, share, and chat. This, when I think about tier 3, and I say, or tier 1, excuse me, and I think about that cooking skill that I had that I was really proficient at in 93 and also proficient at in 2023, I might make a student parallel to that of a student who is really, really good at reading, right? A student who loves reading, has visited the library numerous times, has passion about different genre, and continues to have that passion, seeks out independently books to read and engaging in that literacy activity. That might be a good student parallel to a tier 1 activity for that student. When I think about French, I think about maybe I was really good at math and I could do addition and subtraction really well, but gosh, as soon as we stepped it up to multiplication, that was really difficult. And maybe because I've never had experience with multiplication before, I had a difficult time and I needed some more time and support to understand that multiplication is repeated addition. And once it clicked, I was able to get some of those skills better. So there are opportunities for you to move those skill sets in different ways across the tiers. So I know that Director Mitchell, you had a question. Can I address that question for you now?
Yeah, because I guess my question is that my definite weakness as a child was art. Could color up until a certain point, but then I think I was just saw something recently about how like we get to that age where we start comparing. And then I just always felt myself as less than, which really gave me no confidence. But when we're forced to do art, it just brought my stress level up. And so I never sought out art opportunities. So I would definitely be all the way up there at the red when it came to art. I can appreciate art, but you know, art isn't an essential skill, like reading math and science. I mean, it is still like I can appreciate art, I can draw a line, I can see color, I can do all those things. I'm not saying it's inessential. But when I know when we first did the 24 credit system, there were 2 art credits, my heart palpitated about like what would I do as a student. And for me, when I looked at the catalog, to see that it's not about drawing, it's not about painting, it can be some other things that I actually do have a strength that do count as art. So how do we see, and without having Peter's team and everybody's team, how do teachers or counselors help students take away that fear of that subject and see how broad the topic is, or vice versa? Because some things are just always going to be a weakness. I still cannot draw, I still don't like to, but I do like art.
And I think that's a really interesting point to talk about. Is it's not just about the skills either, but it's also about in creating an environment where a student can feel success.
Yeah.
So my paraphrase and say, you didn't feel successful because you weren't doing it, quote unquote, the right way.
Yeah.
And so through our courses, providing students opportunities for choice and differentiation gives students opportunities to see the realm, as opposed to, if I can't do it exactly like this, I'm wrong. And really helping students to develop a broader understanding about the arts, that you may be gifted at playing piano, but drawing isn't your forte, and that's okay. And that's why we have a great course catalog that provides students opportunities and choice to do that. And I think that Mr. Peters will be speaking a little bit about setting up the stage for a healthy social emotional learning environment where students can feel confident as they're developing their skills, regardless of what that skill set might fall into, either a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3.
Yeah, no, thank you, because it is just, I appreciate this, because I think nobody in this room had that education. It was just sort of, you are good or you're not. It was black and white, and not that you need to get better, or you can get better, or you can look at it differently.
And that is really important for our students to understand, and that's the big emphasis that we've had around growth mindset, is that it isn't about whether you know it or don't know it. Our job is to help kids learn. And we provide the essential opportunities for students to learn in an environment where they feel cared for, where they feel respected, where they feel like they can build those confidence skills to be successful in whatever content area that is. And that's why it's not just about the content that we cover, it's about lighting the fire and inspiring students to be able to learn to their highest levels. So I just wanted to we'll take a little bit of time here, give you an opportunity to stand, share, and chat, and really think about these two questions. Do you want to be known by your weakness? Do you want to be known by the tippy top of your triangle, that red part? And what's your biggest takeaway from creating this triangle and walking through this activity? So I'm going to give you just 2 minutes just to stand up and just be able to stretch a little bit and discuss with maybe the other director that you haven't discussed with yet. We like that kinesthetic movement piece.
Yes. And I think it's where we know the things that we like to do and what and those things that you have difficulties with. You don't want to be known by those. Because if I like to learn how to fly an airplane. Here's if I don't ever fly an airplane, especially now I can't do that. You know, but I love the fact that I try in the things that we can't do. Like I love to garden, you know, and so that's an important part of what I do. Yeah, exactly. And so it's just that I think whatever it is, something positive instead of something negative. Exactly. But I did want to fly. No. I wasn't there. I had the opportunity to be in the, you know, so I wanted to fly, but then I said no.
Different skills. They're very good skills. My grandmother's younger. I'm a good. They're yummy. Yeah.
Good. Sharon, you good?
It's math, it's math and science down here. Up here, there's science and something else that's going on. Like it needs more acid. It needs more than, I don't know what
I love it. Okay, if I could call you back to your seats, and I'd like to continue on with our initiative update.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gave you a little bit of context about understanding MTSS and understanding those tiers of supports, that they aren't locations, they aren't static, they can ebb and flow depending on the level of support that you or a student might need. So in our initiative, we did do this is just kind of a generalized timeline, and we've done some great foundational work over the last few years, specifically with this initiative, and really coordinating some ongoing events, but really focusing on our district MTSS team, our work groups, and helping to coordinate for coherence, consistency, and communication. Our milestones and timelines, so we did a brief survey for stakeholders, and this is a very different survey than our school stakeholders survey, annual survey. This is actually a smaller survey that we were able to utilize the Panorama tool for, and we did a survey with our principals, elementary coaches, counselors, and psychologists last year to get some baseline feedback around what kinds of supports are you providing students and how are you cultivating your systems of support in schools. Additionally, we did some partnership with the Northwest Educational Service District 189. Their MTSS director came down. That's a free service for us, and we were able to use that with those instructional teams to help us to continue to develop common language and systems. MTSS has been around for a long time, But until we can get everybody on the same page, understanding what those tiers are and understanding the ebb and flow where you can change in those tiers was something that was really important to us. And then we had MTSS monthly district meetings, again, to develop that coherence so that we were on the same page. And we collaborated with our PBIS and social emotional learning. We had bi-weekly director meetings. And we aligned some of our resources on Canvas so that teachers were able to access some of those resources. What kinds of differentiated strategies might I use with the student? Who might be exhibiting some behaviors, or might be exhibiting some needs for additional supports. And then finally, in the next few years, we're going to be continuing to develop that academic tiers, assessments, and support. So really thinking about the resources that we have and how can we use those to help our students. This is one of our celebrations. It's just an example of that internal stakeholder survey. So again, we use the Panorama tool to survey 114 teachers, psychologists, counselors, principals, and got some really great baseline data for us. We'll do this survey again in the upcoming August so that we can see how people are using some of that data to inform students and supports and interventions at schools. Yes?
What were your biggest learnings from this stakeholder survey in terms of gaps and such, or just feedback?
One of the things that it really helped us to establish is what was the work of this initiative, and some of it was coordination of our vocabulary and helping us to understand that we needed more clarity around what supports existed that could help our students. So that was one of the biggest pieces, is that we have a lot of ideas. Some people are doing really creative things, but we need to get more organized and intentional about how we're serving students so that we have coordination and alignment across the district. So we had pockets of success with our student intervention teams, but we also had inconsistencies with the way we were talking about things. What was a tier level support, or tier 2 level support versus a tier 3 level support. And we still had some challenges with vocabulary of people still thinking, oh, MTSS means special education. That means they have to go to a different location and have a different curriculum. And that's not what MTSS really was about. So that's where it really helped us to coordinate with the rest of the teams to say, hey, we have to find a common ground so that we can start to build up with our knowledge around MTSS.
When you say that you put these, you put the type of supports that are available on Canvas.
Yes.
How do you do that, and how is there like a database of things so that teachers know and can go and look to find out what supports are available and who do they need to turn to so that they can then direct students in that direction, or what? How's that done?
So our team put together some resources around supporting students through those, through if they needed behavioral intervention, or some different scenarios that students might need additional supports, and they're linked, and there are a wide variety of resources. It could be curriculum resources, it could be, here's a video that helps you to understand how to deal with a student who might have explosive behaviors when they're triggered in a writing lesson. So they've actually, the team, the PBIS team, the MTSS facilitators actually put together a pretty comprehensive bank of resources that they've brought out to different tier 2 teams in schools to help them understand, hey, if you have a student who's not responding in the tier 1 environment, here are some opportunities, here are some strategies that you might be able to try specific to that behavior or that academic need.
I think that's not a perfect example of that, I think, at Emerson, where a kid that, I think I told you before that it was bugs, and then the kid was like, oh my God, it's bugs, I'm gonna throw up. And the teacher just very calmly said, turn around, don't look at it, just listen. And the kid did turn around and listen and participated. And so it was just, I mean, to me that would still be tier 1, because she didn't have to change the situation, she didn't have to do anything, but she very calmly knew how to redirect it.
Right, a differentiated approach to help that student gain access to the content.
Better language, thank you.
And this is another one of our celebrations. This is actually our principals and instructional coaches teams working with Abby, who is the MTSS director from the Northwest ESD, and walking through some of this, gaining that common vocabulary, but then providing some collaborative work time for our teams to actually develop their supports and interventions for their specific building. So how could they access maybe a paraeducator and doing small flexible groups for students who needed additional support, all the way up to what are some of those ways that we can do either consultant or special education evaluation or additional one-to-one support for students who are in need of some tier 3 supports. This is an example of one of the work group support documents. It's in draft mode right now, but it is, you can see we've identified green, yellow, and red for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports. And this is actually a list of our existing curricula. So you can see for some tier 2 supports in Springboard workshops at grades 6, 8, and 9, 12, there are materials that are used for targeted instruction when a student demonstrates a deficiency in a specific skill or standard. There are some specific instructional tools in this curricula that can help those students to achieve that. So this is actually just a way to help organize and point teachers in the right direction of what are the supports that exist to help students. And then with our progress monitoring, many of our schools are shifting from like a student intervention team to what we call a tier 2 team, and really focusing on what are the tier 2 supports that we can do to provide students that access back into tier 1. And then we're actually also doing some comparative survey results and a fidelity tool. But one of the most powerful pieces of progress monitoring that we're doing is actually site-based interviews. We're going out, our team is going out and having conversations with principals and coaches who are part of those tier 2 teams and seeking out what kinds of supports do you need? What might not be clear? What are they, academic or the behavioral supports, and how can we help to support the whole child? And that's been a huge emphasis that we've taken both as leadership here in our cabinet and also in our schools, is that it is always focused on the whole child. It's not just about academics, not just about behavior, but it is about the whole child.
So I guess I just got a little bit confused because you began by saying that that's a tier 1 and that's a tier 2, and now you're saying you have a tier 2 team. So why isn't it an MTSS team or something to show the whole thing?
Primarily, this is really talking specifically about what are some tier 2 interventions that we can do for students who need additional frequency, time, or duration in the classroom, and that is having a group of people come together and talk about, not as a location for tier 2 intervention, but what interventions do we have in place that would provide support for that student? And that might be things like small flexible groups. That might be a push-in or a co-teaching model so that that student can access that tier 1 instruction in their general education classroom without having to go be sent somewhere else to get additional support.
And they're doing that looking at a student. So it's not a general what could the school do. It's really what does this student need, what does that student need, what does the third student need?
That's correct. So someone might bring a student's profile to a team and say, I'm worried about this student. When we sit down for literacy time, the student really triggers, we see some behaviors that are impeding the student from accessing the general ed curriculum. What are some supports that we can provide for the student? So it might be, okay, is writing a trigger for this student? Does it always happen during this time? Could we push in some support where we could provide a little bit additional one-on-one adult support with that? Is it the student doesn't have phonics acquisition, so reading is really difficult for them? What are some interventions we can put in place that we can help to build that skill set? And it may not be a person. It could be as simple as, boy, they're going to use the iReady intervention tool to help build their phonics skills so that they're able to access the general education reading curriculum in their classrooms.
So give me an idea. Give me an idea when these teams come together to meet to evaluate a particular type of resources that might be available for a student. Is it on the Fridays, the Lift Fridays? Is it after school? Is it before or after SBA test or a unit test assessment? Or, when is all of this done, and how frequently and quickly does it get back to the student so that the student can then, get the resources they need to get back into the classroom to, and pick up where they were at?
So frequently, on those Fridays where they have lift times, teams are getting together and doing data analysis on their students right there. And that we wouldn't even consider necessarily to be a tier 2 intervention. We would actually talk about that as tier 1, because good instruction is differentiated tier 1 instruction. And so they may say, hey, I have my assessment data, these students need some reteaching, I can provide that opportunity within my classroom to do this next week. Or you've got a group that did really, really well, what did you do differently? How can I do that lesson with my students? So that would be a tier 1 reteach opportunity. And tier 2 is a little bit more of an intense, it's again, additional frequency, duration, or intensity. And it's really thinking about what else might this student need that's beyond differentiation in a tier 1 situation. So they may have, in a classroom, hey, I've tried some of the iReady intervention, I've tried some push-in, the student's still not responding to this, what are some other strategies that we can do? And that's really unique. The days and times are unique to a building's team and how that works best for their schedule. But we do constant data team analysis and evaluation of student assessment data on a relatively regular basis so that we can intervene in the just-in-time way so that those students can optimize their success in the classroom.
But this is something that is not done just in time.
This is done something that's a little bit more of a longitudinal profile of a student. Wow, they're consistently struggling in this area. We've already tried some tier 1 instructional interventions, and now we think we might actually need some additional time or frequency for the student to be successful at that.
But it is set up cyclically so that these teams can come back and analyze the student's response to intervention and make adjustments accordingly. I think you alluded to that. I just wanted to double down on that concept that the teams are looping back to see whether those interventions work, to what extent, and how to move forward more effectively.
And is the classroom teacher involved? I mean, like, do they bring in, the classroom teacher will go through his or her students, another teacher might come in, go through their students?
Absolutely, that classroom teacher
Because I
is,
figure that's how you get it the next day.
that's correct. That practitioner that's with that student is able to get that profile, understand that student's needs. And a lot of time, this is a troubleshoot team too, right? I've tried this, I'm trying some different strategies, it's not working, what else can I do? And we can explore some additional supports that might be helpful for that student. Director Hillman?
Does this stay in the student record? I'm thinking a 4th grade teacher looking back to say, see, the student had trouble doing X, Y, or Z. And so is that something that's going to follow them along throughout their...
Yes, and because it isn't a destination, we don't want it to, we don't want a student's track record to say, oh, this is the student struggled here. But what we do want to do is make sure that we're recording some of those interventions and assessing where those students are to see if we're monitoring that progress. So that piece is something that's continued on so that we can share with the next teacher. They struggle in phonics, for example, so this might be an opportunity that you want to build some scaffolds for that student to be successful in the tier 1 situation. So our continued challenges are just really calibrating our key understanding systems and terms and supports. I think we've gotten a great start on that, but we need to make sure that we've got that consistency across all departments and schools. And then the opportunities is the timeline of the rolling it out and clarity and connection with our multilingual learner critical data matrices. So helping those students who are getting ML services to really move things forward. And then our big opportunity is really the teacher feedback. Those teachers provide us those practitioners that are in the moment provide us great feedback on what they might need, how we can adjust our systemic support to help them to help our students. And then we've really spent a lot of time engaging others. We've done a lot of cross-departmental collaboration meetings, our elementary instructional team, which is principals and coaches, and then our work groups, and again, those site-based interviews are really a way for us to continue to engage others and keep our feet on the ground with the people who are down there in the trenches working every day with those students. So hopefully we're back to our Ferris wheel, but hopefully you have a good understanding about what that MTSS looks like and how it can connect to the social emotional learning and some of those positive behavior support. I'm going to turn the next slide over to Mr. Peters.
As the two of you are up there, I just have one other question. Given our current budget situation, how do we continue to provide these services with staffing, with new learnings, gathering those learnings, gathering maybe the tools or the expertise that we need to make sure this happens? I mean, and I'm sure we don't know we don't know, but.
Right. I think that the real answer is truly about integration and collaboration. It's thinking about, as we're doing things around curriculum adoption, is really making it explicit. Here are the tier 1 interventions and supports that will help students to be successful, and here are the tier 2 supports that will help students be successful to help continue to grow. Dr. Salzman.
That's a really good question, Director Mitchell. I think also as you have these people at the table now, teachers and staff and principals, that eventually things become cost neutral because everybody in the system is trained to do it, becomes a norm, becomes habitual. So you don't need that extra, but it's already built in time that everybody knows how to help the student.
And I appreciate that because I think, parents, or as we're hearing all these really districts all around the place with these budget cuts, that this is a continuous process. This is going to be, we are going to continue to support the students, not just in their learning, but in being a human and everything that takes. So I just appreciate.
And it's not the add-on, it's the embed within.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so put this slide up here so that you can see the connection between Initiative A1A and A2A, that they both include social emotional learning components that are embedded in them. And they're both under strategic theme A, which is a supportive culture where each student is engaged, thrives, and values learning. So to start off this part of the session for you, we'd like to ask you to identify, just briefly here, 3 to 5 characteristics that make this sentence true for you. So I hope that our students are blank when they've graduated and are in their 20s. So you have a sheet, I think on the back of the triangle sheet, you've got a little spot you just jot down 30 seconds or so, just 3 to 5 ideas.
Could be more than one word.
Oh, sure.
Thank you for asking that question.
So would you like to each of just share out maybe a couple that you have, or some of those ideas that you'd like our students, these characteristics to have when they graduate and understand?
First word that jumped to mind for me was confidence, and then resilient, career ready for several, and the phrase well prepared for life. Just
Okay.
came to mind. Yeah.
I have prepared for life, inquisitive, engaged in learning, resilient, creative, consistently growing.
I actually realized, I sort of chuckled at myself because what I wrote down, I first did prepared, but then when I asked the question, can we use more words, they're really in there as is the MTSS, so that they're able to identify their resources, that they're independent in most areas, but then they're also lifetime learners. So I was like, oh, I've got some green and yellow in here, no red, but hopefully they're moving on red.
It's funny, my first one was lifelong learner or continuously curious, continually curious. And then I put have healthy relationships, both that they can contribute and choose them.
Great, thank you. So we borrowed this exercise from Dr. Mark Brackett in a ruler implementation training that we had a couple of weeks ago. And of course, Dr. Brackett has access to a lot of people across the country, and so as he did this survey, the common responses nationally, I think there's some commonalities in some of the ones that you've all described, right? That, and this list is not probably different than we would want for our own kids as well, right? We want them to be happy, socially responsible, and civically engaged, independent, self-reliant, successful at work. We've heard some of them skilled in their social emotional learning for themselves, kind and respectful to others, resilient, persistent, right? And then and their lives are full of meaning and purpose. So, and what was really interesting about this that he brought out was that, and not to diminish in any way, but that it wasn't very common for people to say that they had really high SAT scores, or that they had, right, that they were incredible in calculus, and those kinds of things, right? And to the contrary, I mean, those things are critically important, right? That's how we become independent and self-reliant. When we're with high academic achievement, we become successful at working those things. But that there's also an experience, like a whole person that, you know, that we want for our kids and for our graduates too. And it's really highlighting in SEL, right, the social and emotional part of the learning, which Dr. Brackett describes as the other side of the report card. So our milestones and timelines, this is our second year for A1A. And so we're providing that professional learning through Ruler for all of our staff. For second step, we've identified lessons that are delivered to our elementary students throughout the year by the teachers, which is a transition from the counseling staff. And then for PBIS, our positive behavior interventions and supports, right? We had some strong momentum pre-COVID, and then COVID changed everything in terms of how we interacted with students and how they interacted with teachers and that. And so now we're at a spot where we're sort of needing to dust off our PBIS practices that look a little more typical now, right? Now that we've returned one out of the hybrid and
I was going to ask that, you know, we early in the year had the all staff training on Ruler or introduction or exposure. And then there was the follow-up 4-hour staff. That's self-paced. What is the level of engagement with that? We have, you know, over 2,000 staff members. Right. Do we know how many people have sort of followed up with that, even though it's accessible to, I think, everyone? Yeah.
We do have some data around that from the clock hours that they submit, that they apply for. And so and I think what's happening too is around those break times, we had a significant increase right after winter break of people that submitted those. We're anticipating another group here right before spring break, or after spring break and things like that. So I don't know off the top yet if it's a third of the staff or, you know, that. Yeah. And so it's not a required training. Obviously, there's some incentives there for folks to do it. And especially after the October 14th opportunity, we had a lot of folks that were very interested. Some that just started right away into that training.
I had a question regarding the second step lesson that was delivered to elementary school harassment, intimidation, bullying, and protection units. My question is, this was done for elementary students. Right now, we have a big concern with middle school students and cyberbullying. Will that one day be part of the curriculum taught by counselors for students?
Yes, in fact, it is already in middle schools. Second step is taught by the counselors too, and they do cover these. The reason why the elementary piece is highlighted on here is because of the transition where it's now taught by teachers.
Okay.
Right? So that ownership for social emotional learning shifts from just a small group of staff, like that's their job to do this, is now our job. Like social emotional learning, explicit and implicit, is part of the state standards, it's what's expected. And so to broaden that level of ownership is why we're pulling that out particularly here.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
And so, as you mentioned, we had on October 14th as celebrations, every employee group had the opportunity to participate in our Learning Improvement Day at the Angel Winds Arena with Dr. Mark Brackett. And And very exciting to have that district-wide. And as we mentioned, the second step, or that's a celebration that all of our staff are now doing that. And so as the year has gone on, our implementation teams with Ruler have been planning, and they've been utilizing tools like the mood meter, exercising on purpose, things like the meta moment, building charters. We've seen examples of those across the system at times. Some teachers, next year is the rollout for students, but some of the teachers can't help themselves, and they're actually doing it now, and we're really excited about that, and through the learning of that too. So great celebrations there. With PBIS, we've developed the 5 core principles of PBIS for Everett Public Schools. That's those indicators on the right-hand or left-hand side. And then from the behavior menu of best practices and strategies from OSPI, it's a 173-page document, and we use that for our discipline matrix. And we've also, from that and from the pbis.org, boiled out for our Tier 1 purposes some of the best evidence-based best practices for Tier 1 behaviors that so that we have some system-wide alignment, right? Classroom-based practices, school-wide based practices.
Dave, can you just elaborate a little more for the board about that chart of the classroom, what we're doing?
Yes. So, and I'll there's another slide coming up with this too. So then for milestones and timelines, so forefront in the schools, we've heard we're part of a cohort with the University of Washington for suicide prevention. We're now in year 2, so phase 2, where this is now where we're beginning to develop and spread out the training to staff and then to students and families as well through a train-trainer model, peer train-trainer model. We have created a fidelity measurement, the benchmark of implementation, which is what Dr. Salzman's asked me to elaborate a little bit on. So when we talk about those Tier 1 best practices, for example, that's a component of this fidelity measure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and some of the celebrations that work around that. And we've also launched a district behavior cadre. This has been through the years where we can align our training around de-escalation, co-regulation, trauma-sensitive practices, and restorative practices. And so some celebrations we'll get into on this as well. But those are some of the milestones that we've been working on with those 2 initiatives. So some examples of the celebrations in our recent work. So our forefront suicide prevention, we had last year was the year where we developed our crisis plans. So our infrastructure, prevention, intervention, reentry, and postvention planning. And so the crisis plans were pretty extensive, and forefront, they gave us the heads up that typically the first time when schools or school districts submit their crisis plans, they don't quite meet standard. They still need some work, right? And when we submitted ours, we were very intentional. We took that to heart, and anyway, we exceeded expectations on our first go, and so we're very proud of that. And so we're very motivated to get into that exemplary category, which we know we will be this year. So another celebration of this, though, and as I said, in phase 2, we're now training staff. So at one of our recent counselor meetings, 2 of our MTSS social workers put together and delivered some lessons on suicide prevention and suicide protocols, basically, for our elementary counselors. And so unfortunately, right, because of the results attendant, we know that this is a nationwide problem, right, that suicidal ideations are happening at lower and lower grade levels and ages. And so out of that respect and care for our elementary counseling teams and our admin groups, we wanted to help equip them, right, and provide them some of the same training that our high school counselors have been getting through this forefront. So we're working it down now through the system. And not just in the LEARN training, which are those things that, like, LEARN is an acronym. It stands for look and listen, empathize, ask, remove dangers, and then next steps, right? And that's what we will be training our staff and our students and our families on. Those are those signs, those things to look for, right? But what happens when a student has been identified with suicidal ideologies? Then what do we do? right? And this is where we went into that deeper dive with our elementary counselors, so that they know the protocols that we use, when we're in combination with social workers, parents, law enforcement, CPS, any of those, and how to end, our emergency rooms and our crisis lines. How does all that work together so that we're following the procedure, following the forefront protocols? So that was very greatly appreciated by our elementary counselors, and we're excited to be able to put that together.
You said very quickly parents. So for the elementary school, I think I would be pretty, as an elementary school parent, I probably would have been pretty ignorant that elementary schoolers, that was even a risk. So how do you, who provides education for the parents, or in what way does that happen to give them resources which they might not think they need?
We've been really grateful to have our MTSS social workers as a resource. So they've been able to, they'll meet with those families, right? And they help to first break the ice.
Risk families, or?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so
if it's-
not general education that Jesus has a risk for elementary school kids. It's your child,
That's
decisions
right.
are, okay.
That's right. We're really, yeah, I understand your question. So the family, the parent training is
Yeah.
typically more at the high school level, right? Maybe middle school a bit, very different. But elementary, it's just more when those situations happen, working with the families of that student,
Okay.
right? And helping them navigate that, and the reentry planning and the aftercare and those kinds of things. With the behavior cadre, this is where we were talking about aligning our training around de-escalation and trauma-sensitive practices, restorative practices, and those things. And so really the importance of helping our educators really navigate and become more fluent with brain science around trauma and its impact on learning, so that when you're trying to reason with a student, trying to help them learn, so they're in their cortex, right? But they have to navigate the obstacle course. Before you can reason with someone, you've got to be able to regulate them, and then, right, and relate, then you can finally get. So helping them understand a little bit of deeper lens, so that they're not as much in a place to wonder what is wrong with you, rather than, what happened to you that has led you to this place. And so through these these trainings, it's really helping to open up that dialogue and that understanding, some of the research behind that. And so this photo on the left is an example of one of those trainings at one of our schools recently. Probably a third of our schools have had the training now so far, with the remaining groups, probably through the end of April, very early part of May, they've signed up. Typically, they're using their admin lift times or extended staff meetings to have these trainings now. With Panorama, you're familiar with that survey, and Dr. Botok, this, from the fall survey, we had almost 80% of our students responded, which we're very excited about, because we want to have the highest percentage of student voice that we can to inform our next steps decisions and that. From our benchmarks of implementation, so every one of our schools, their teams, the MTSS teams at each of our schools have had an opportunity to use that benchmarks of implementation fidelity to sit down together and do a self-reflection of their school in 10 different categories with a lot of number of questions per category, and then be able to unpack that and be really honest and reflective about where are they. And so what we've seen of those are the top 3 strengths: school-wide expectations, classroom instruction systems and routines, and team composition. Those seem to be the highest reflected areas of the survey. A couple of opportunities was effective procedures for responding to challenging behaviors. It's an area that they all recognize that they need some more training around or some more intentionality with, as well as the data entry and analysis plan. We have a lot of data. We have issues and referrals, our Panorama Student Success Platform, but to be very intentional as a system, as a team, to analyze that behavior data, to inform their steps, not just as a teacher in the classroom, but as a whole school.
Do we have?
Oh, it was just a question on there, the range. Those are, that's
That's school data.
It is,
Yeah.
so, okay, so there is a school that, there's schools on either end of those,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is how they're rating themselves. Yeah, in this inventory.
I had a question around the data entry and analysis. Do we have a good system in place that collects that data and allows like an individual teacher to go in and look at it and understand what it means?
We do, yeah. And so we have a number of systems that where they have the availability of data. Panorama is a significant piece where they can, there's a number of different categories that survey that is taken, right, that you can show. But teachers can use issues and referrals, which is it's set up right now so that teachers can record minor infractions without having to send them to the administration, but they can kind of keep track of that and then have conversations with parents, intervene with students, right? Focus on some of those maybe as an MTSS team, those tier 2 behavior interventions. And, but then for the ones that are more significant or a repeated pattern over time, they can convert that to a referral that then goes to the administration and then they can respond to that as well. But again, kind of collectively as a school, are we using that information together to sit down and analyze that and see our building-wide patterns, which may be different from school to school depending on, right, the culture and the...
Right. My question is, how is this, if we have data and that's available and it is available at teachers' fingertips, so to speak,
Yeah.
how are we ensuring that the data is secure?
It would be probably no different than any of our other data systems, right? eSchool, right? All of the systems that we use are confidential that way, right? And there's that level of confidentiality that we
Right.
all have to, and a need-to-know basis.
Right.
So when you and I are both working on trying to intervene with a certain student, right? We have a need-to-know basis at that point.
Okay.
But if, Director Mason doesn't have any connection with what we're doing, then we would be cautious about what we
Sharing the information
Yeah.
with that particular person, but if it's available at a teacher's fingertips, i.e. it's on their computer, how do we safeguard any information about any individual student?
I think it would be the same that we would, again, for any other piece of information that's available at their fingertips. Their report cards, their medical, anything that's appropriate that a teacher would have access to, discipline records, things like that. So how teachers safeguard all of that information is similar to how they would be treating this information too. That would be the expectation.
I just have a quick question about the procedures for responding to challenging behaviors, because I'm guessing with frequency comes sort of affect, confidence. So if you've got, just imagine a classroom where maybe every kid is mostly good, that you don't have a trauma kid, you don't have a behavior kid, you don't have anything, your response to this is you might not know if there's effective procedures because you haven't accessed them, but also you're not building your skills because you're the lucky one that got that classroom, versus a teacher that has 2 or 3 of them, is doing it every day, is managing it. They're gonna feel a lot more confident or competent with that there's effective procedures. And so I wonder if there's a reasonableness here, and at the same time, how do you keep the skill levels of everyone up, even if they are not experiencing it?
Right. So when we get to the next steps
Okay.
piece, I'll share a little bit about
Okay.
how that's moving forward. And
Dave, sorry to interrupt, but I just stepped out the question about the security of student information. And anything that is in our system is protected. So the efforts we make to keep data secure would be no matter what they enter it into and where it's at. It's of the utmost importance.
Password protected.
Yeah, it's password protected. We're doing other pieces of information that are added additional security measures to have several layers. The security of our student staff information is critical, so that we have those measures in place that we practice every day.
Thank you very much.
yeah, you can have faith that it's not being sold or harvested or
Yeah, and that was one of the questions that I was thinking about, is those that have the ability to hack into the system. I look at one school district who had problems, and information is constantly being stolen, I guess, from your own pharmacies, your own hospitals, and the concern I have is we have vulnerable students, and if certain information were to be leaked, you'd never know what those vulnerable students might then do, and so, just concerned.
This is an example immediately after one of those benchmarks of implementation team meetings. So this is like within several days later. The team put together a newsletter to send out to their entire staff that talked about their mission statement around this, their staff commitments, and some tips. So already, we have action tools, action planning tools available, and it was just exciting to see them doing. So some of the challenges and opportunities of this work is just the access to the professional learning time provided to all the school staff clearly, right? But I think, Director Mitchell, you had a question earlier. Basically, it's around, for us, it's building up that capacity, finding those opportunities to train at the individual school level, to leverage that train-the-trainer model, right? So that, or as Dr. Salzman, as you explained, and really working with our educators in the training, not doing it for them continually forever, but doing it with them to build up their capacity. PBIS too, it involves changing adult mindsets and practices in some ways, right? So for example, one area that we've seen is that a student becomes sent down to the office and they have a restorative conversation with the administrator, how they do, they de-escalate the student, and then the student goes back to the class and the teacher hasn't had that restorative conversation yet with the student. And what our systems, what we're trying to do is align that so that maybe perhaps the administrator walks the student back to the classroom, has a quick conversation with the teacher. Hey, do you want me to continue the lesson while you step outside and talk to the student? They're at a place where they'd like to talk to you now. Like those kinds of things, right? And as we said before, it's that change of what's wrong with you to what happened to you, or what struggles are you going through, what maybe did I contribute, those kinds of things as well. And as Dr. Brackett's talked to us about, is becoming emotion scientists, becoming curious, asking I wonder why, rather than just jumping to conclusions based on our own values or our own patterns that we recognize on that. So I've got a short video clip to show you that we have shared in those behavior cadre meetings, and actually shared in a number of contexts. This is from Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a pioneer basically in some of the research around trauma and its effects on the brain and on learning. And so as you watch this video, I'd love for you to listen and think through some examples that you can connect back to some of these initiatives that we've been talking about here today.
The challenge for an educator, of course, is that you're in the classroom, and how are you going to address, equity in the community? It's a tough, you really can't. I mean, you in that moment, as you teach, are not going to be able to change poverty in your neighborhood, or change income inequality, or other things that contribute to the broader conditions that dysregulate the families and the kids that you work with. But what you can do in the classroom is create a community of respect, a community of regulation. You have a lot of power in the little moments that you have with these kids. And that power can have transforming impact for many of these kids. You can help them feel rewarded, you can help them feel regulated, you can help them feel respected, you can help them essentially, physiologically become healthier. And it doesn't take, it's really not what you know, it's how you are. It's the way you interact with them. If you listen, if you calm yourself down and let all that stuff go and let these moments with these kids be true moments where you're right there with them, they only have to be seconds long. They'll feel it, you'll both feel rewarded and regulated, and then you can get back to whatever else you're doing. And one of the things that a lot of people, when they hear this, are kind of wondering about it and almost afraid of it. It's like, well, how do I connect with 40 kids in a classroom? And I just want to reassure people that the timeline for connecting with a person is literally milliseconds. That if you as the teacher feel regulated and confident, you can, with the tiniest little glance, make a child feel like you're paying attention to them. Because the reality is, you are. If you as the teacher are regulated and you're really in that moment listening to a student as they talk, they'll feel that. You don't need to be relationally in a personal relationship with every single kid, but you need to be relationally present and relationally respectful, and that only takes a moment. And so the challenge of being connected with kids in your classroom is not as great as somebody might otherwise think. It really, these little moments are powerful. And so in the hallway, if you see a kid that you know is in your classroom, and you just take a moment and say, hey, what class are you in? And that's probably noticeable. And if you say their name, little things like that literally can create a relational connection. And furthermore, those interactions are regular. So it makes the child feel connected and safer. And which means that even though you don't realize it, you doing that for that 10 seconds in the hallway makes this student better capable of learning in the next classroom, because his cortex will be more available for business.
So on your sheet, the prompt is there that, there we go. As you listen to the video, what connections can you make between the ideas that Dr. Perry shared and the actions and systems shared within these initiatives? And then as you're ready, if you'd like to just share out an idea that you had from the video that might have stood out to you that way.
I'll share. Mine was a connection and maybe a little bit of a disconnection, because as I'm listening to the presentations tonight, it's very focused on what the adult can do for the child and with the child. And I guess, in going through these trainings, they're also learning how they can behave differently. But it seems like I guess my question really is, how do we help the adults learn how to cope through these situations? Because, we're talking about how they help the child cope through these situations. But we're human, and reaction is just such a part of our ingrained, as parents, and we all lose it sometimes, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
And if you have a particularly maybe challenging student, time and time again, there might come a time, and not to share personally, but that happened to my child.
Sure.
The adult was the one who kind of lost it. He was a bit of a button pusher. How do we handle that as a system?
I really appreciate you asking that, because this really emphasizes why we started with Ruler this year, training our entire staff. We spent a whole year really emphasizing that, because we know that the things that we're going to be teaching our students, they haven't had necessarily this explicit social emotional education all the way up, right? And we likely didn't either when we were in school. And so our staff, it starts with the adults. And so those examples like the meta moment, that tool, that skill, to when you feel yourself, you sense that you're about to react, instead of reacting, you first pause. And then you kind of imagine, what would my best self be right now? Who my better self, right? In this moment, right, I want to be seen as an educator who is caring and loving and respectful, right? And so then you can think of quickly some strategies that you might use to change, instead of reacting how you may have at first, shift to the other. These are the same kinds of tools that we want to teach our students, but our adults are the ones who model that, right? And that's who our students. So that is why we've been so intentional about investing this time. And I think the longer that those of us who are working with this, we now see the wisdom that Mark Brackett and those at Ruler and others have shared around this, that you've got to start with the adults in the system.
It'll be interesting to see as this plays out over the years, because
Sure.
it takes practice.
It sure does.
And, you know, and you
There's
need
skills,
a
yeah.
toolkit, you know,
That's
to
right.
learn, yeah, thank you.
Right. They're skills, right? And
Yeah.
it does take a long time to, especially beyond that. If you remember Ted Lasso, so we had spent some time during our summer institute talking about Ted Lasso, some of the wisdom that he had. And this was just a quick little quote. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen the show, but they get to the end of the season and they're doing really well, and they in this big game and they lose. And so now they're in the locker room and everybody's really sad. And Ted Lasso says this.
And I want you to be grateful that you're going through this sad moment with all these other folks. Because I promise you, there is something worse out there than being sad, and that is being alone and being sad. Ain't nobody in this room alone.
If you remember at the October 14th Learning Improvement Day, that's actually not Ted Lasso, but that's something that Dr. Brackett closed with. He had said that it's his goal and his mission that students don't have to struggle alone. So when we talk about social emotional learning, just really emphasizing again, we typically will think of the emotional part of SEL, but the S is social. It's social and emotional learning. And I think this captures all of that together. And that's how we want, as we build communities and a sense of belonging in our schools, that it's important to think of it like this. So our next steps, just as we close here, leveraging our data, we've kind of talked about this, right? We have the panorama, the benchmarks of implementation, issues and referrals, and that. Ruler, we want to ground the skills and the tools with our teachers, staff, and then students and families as we develop emotional intelligence among our stakeholders. And then for Forefront now, we're at that phase where we're starting to teach the look-fors and the signs to our stakeholders as well. For A2A, again, it's building that capacity for the 25 evidence-based Tier 1 practices, providing site-based coaching and the technical assistance for all of the tools that we have, and then coaching around the Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions for students who do demonstrate that greater need. And this is just like in academics, as we talked about. Students have different needs in the learning, and I think Director Rich, you talked about art in that. Well, it goes the same with behaviors as well, right? Everybody comes to us at a different place. They have different backgrounds and different understandings, and they have different emotions that are driving those behaviors. And so we need to meet students where they are and help teach them the display rules and the emotional regulation skills so that they can be successful in our academic environments, but also in our social environments and their relationships in the future.
And then just to recap some of our next steps with B1B, we're really focusing on that cross-departmental training and collaboration. It's the building of the capacity within our staff, and also not as MTSS as an add-on, but an embed in. Finding opportunities to embed those strategies within some of our already existing professional learning for cost-neutral opportunities, and really emphasizing that good instruction, tier 1 instruction is differentiated instruction, and we can meet students where they are. We're continuing to vet out those support documents and getting feedback from our stakeholders on, does this actually work? Is this a good resource? Is this not a good resource? What could we do to tweak that resource? And then finally develop that phase 2 installment, really utilizing those site-based interviews, because quite frankly, the feedback that we get from those practitioners in the classroom is really valuable in helping us to develop what can we do to help to support those teachers next.
Can I ask one other question, just to maybe to go on to the video, but the question that he asked me, like, how do we do 40 kids? Thank goodness we don't have, hopefully no classes that have 40, but it is, I've heard some best practices and just wondering what the evidence is of the teacher who does greet each student when they come into the classroom to level set that I'm here for you, whatever that message is, and that quick little handshake or greeting. I believe some schools do it, some teachers do it, and by no means do I want to set like a behavior standard, but is there evidence, or what is our belief and our support for encouraging that greeting right for every student when they walk in the classroom?
We've actually been teaching this in those behavior cognitive, those trainings, because the cumulative effects, when you've got a student that has gone through a lot of abuse and neglect, betrayal, or any of those were there, they have a difficult time trusting people, for good reason, from their perspective. So how do you break that down? How do you help someone begin to trust again? Well, it's cumulative over time. They have to see consistency, and not just from one person, but from a lot of different people. And so what we've shared is just some strategies, challenging the staff. We've got a staff, say, of 50 people. And how could you, when you're in the hallways, when you're at the lunchroom, kids that you don't typically see all the time, not the ones in your class, we're going to assume you're doing some positive things, but can you offer them genuine smiles? Give them the high fives, the elbow bumps, the fist bumps, say, hey, it's great to see you today. Those kinds of things, right? Plus the greetings at the door. But those kinds of things, if every staff member did that 10 times a day, 10 different kids that they don't know, that's 500 in a day, 2,500 in a week. It's almost 100,000 extra above and beyond cumulative positive experiences that will shape that community, that sense of belonging. So those are things that we're challenging, just issuing out. It's free, right? The smile you give is a gift. You just give that as freely as you can. So.
And the good news is that those actions are observable, measurable, and communicated through staff meetings and with principals and whatnot to grow the capacity to give real-time data to staff to meet those goals. And it's a proactive, very altruistic, very positive goal to meet because everybody wants to do that. Everybody knows that it works, and they're not fancy, it's not glamorous, but it's the hard work of making those connections. And those are the things that we coach for from the folks in this room, the regionals, through the principals. That is a common thread, and we want to see it increasingly as a common thread in local professional development as well. So I'm going to take us home here. You've seen I guess we're calling this the Ferris wheel now. So we've seen the Ferris wheel a couple of times. We've used the metaphor of an umbrella. You've seen the interconnectedness. You've seen the integration. I think we've hopefully made the case. It's one of our success criteria, making the case of these things being integrated as well as having connections to other strategic initiatives. You have a greater understanding. You had a baseline understanding of MTSS. We hope that that understanding has grown. And we wanted, just for the sake of time, for you all to have the last word with any questions or comments that you might have. Any connections that, yes, absolutely.
I actually, I'm going to put Dr. Golden on the spot here. Give you a minute to wake up and get ready to answer. No. One of my questions is, are you seeing applicants coming through? Is this embedded in the teacher training programs now in universities with the candidates that are coming through? And do we have any questions or any aspect of our interview process that can help identify people who understand this work or might be better at it? I'm an absolute believer that you can learn these skills, but I also do understand human behavior, and some people are just better at it.
Yeah, I would say that things continue to evolve, and teacher prep is one of those things that as we've gone through the pandemic, we've seen the same shifts in what teachers are prepared for. We also notice that teachers coming in are, as they always have been, sharing their own expertise with the teachers that are guiding them as well. So in addition, the interview questions we use evolve as the practices do as well.
Thank you.
Are you seeing more of an acceptance with newer teachers coming in of this work than with those that are maybe my age.
I don't know that we're seeing much difference. I think that's an anecdotal response to your question. I think based on just differences that Chad just mentioned in some teacher preparation programs and the like, and then just the accessibility of the generation that grew up on YouTube and know how to access information all across the world, and just generational aspects perhaps. But we saw some tremendous response from folks and we are fortunate to have a teacher corps here who are avid learners in their 30th year of teaching, right? And that's not uncommon, which we're fortunate to have. So building, again, that spirit of lifelong learning and trying new things and observations among peers and seeing those connections and demystifying that it doesn't have to be, these can be learned, as Director Mason mentioned, is hopeful across the system.
If I can say too, that seeing the transition as a parent and as a board member from the counselors doing the SEL when my daughter was in middle school, and it was the SEL day or SEL session, and it was always sort of an eye roll kind of thing, versus how we have transformed into embedded, and it's not just the counselor. I mean, I really hope that there is a way we can look back, and as we look forward, and maybe do our own longitudinal, how have our kids transformed with that blip of the pandemic, of course, but it would just mean, not that it needs to be presented to us or the community, but just to see that embedded versus special really is, I think it's the right thing, but do we see a difference? I think that would be really exciting to see.
And I just can add a few things. First of all, great questions that you've asked tonight. And it will be contagious. It will be habitual. What's the greatest joy when our youngsters come home to their parents and say, I love school, I love my teacher. And so, and to Director Mason's question, it will take time, longitudinally, of how are we doing this and how do we build those relationships. Our teachers work on it every day and they're doing a great job at it. There's another group of adults that do it exceptionally well too. The coaches of our youngsters, right? So it's just how we're doing this work, like you said, Director Mitchell, embedded, and how you ask, how do we know and how do we see this? Just that good morning, they're greeted in all levels. And when kids feel connected right away, they'll feel connected not just through the whole day, but through their whole career. And it's just, we keep working on this, but you see the great shift by the departments and by the team of doing this work. It's embedded in the work. So really good questions tonight as, we try to help our children.
I just want to chime in. I love this work and really trying to have this infused, as we're saying, through our schools. When I think about our schools sometimes being just very large, and the fear of parents, I think, can be that kids are falling through the cracks. And so that idea of someone knows you, that sense of belonging, is so very important for us to achieve all of our goals. And it starts with modeling. It really does from all of the school level, the principal. Hopefully that's really setting the stage of everything here. But I just really like that our district is focusing on this and recognizes the importance of this in our school.
One of the things I notice is on the bottom of the card, it says strengthen student wellness, engagement and safety. And this is not right on the money, It will also show dividends when you try to ensure that students are prepared to succeed. Their emotional learning comes out in that. They will succeed if they feel confident, resilient, and if they are fully engaged. reducing the gaps and increase the math achievement, increase science achievement, ensure third grade literacy. When they like coming to school, they enjoy coming, and they know they have that relationship with their teachers. That, you know, teacher A is the best teacher that I ever had, you know. You'll learn a lot more from teacher A, you know, than you will from teacher Z that, you know, I wish I don't have to go to that person's class, you know. I think this is important work, and I'm glad we're doing it. I appreciate the presentation.
And I think with my first example are, what I've heard about this whole thing too is like, you know, starting out with I might not be proficient at art, but at least I can be competent and confident and not say I'm not an artist, but just at least I've got a competence level that, you know, to go to your French example. You were exceptional, now you're good, and that good is and good is enough, and that's okay.
So in closing, I would just like to thank our presenters tonight. I would like to just compliment the integrated approach. But I hope we all can feel a lot of pride in our strategic plan. With Dr. Saltzman's leadership, with the board, our strategic plan has the whole child at the very center. I think all of our initiatives exemplify that, but certainly these three tonight, and we appreciate your engagement, your questions, always pushing us, prompting us to go deeper. So thank you. We have our next strategic update is April 18th. The theme for that night will be around reducing barriers, increasing opportunity. So you will hear an initiative that's very broad that looks at the system about how we do that. You will also hear an initiative that increases opportunity and access through our early learning initiatives, as well as a long-term strategy to look at our assessment and grading practices. So with that look ahead, I would turn it back to the president.
So I was just thinking about this. My own company, we've got some initiatives that came out from a consulting company, and it is kept at sort of this level that we have tonight. And how does the staff know or learn where we are with these strategic initiatives, that their work, how valuable their work is, how they're helping to move things forwards? Because I can say, I haven't had that message yet, and maybe just because it's early, but how does our staff hear this or receive the same information?
I think two quick parts. You might be surprised at how many pay attention to the board docs attachments. I get lots of questions and comments around that. But you might also remember back to the summer when we talked about how do we communicate the work of the strategic plan in action. We have 6 themes, and Kathy Reason actually met and checked in today as we're halfway through our reporting season through these. So that we're starting to craft those stories about these initiatives, their impact, and how we're engaging others. And one of our big audiences is staff, because we want these stories for them to connect to understand, to see where their voices were heard, and help shape it and the impact that collectively we're having. Of course, there's also the community as well, but one of our primary audiences is to help our staff community. So we're working on some initial ideas, and we'll be working on that in the coming weeks and months.
One thing that helps too is, so we have level meetings where the elementary principals meet and the middle school principals meet, high school principals meet. So when you go to the strategic plans at those level meetings, and then the principals get it, they go over with their staff, and it just becomes it has to start organically with the leader of the building to message it. So we try to do a strategic plan update at level meetings, and so everybody understands where the mission is, because this is an ongoing plan, right? It's going to keep going and going. You get little results, and the little results, staff sees those little results. Oh, okay. And it's an easy plan to understand. You had to make this easy so everybody can understand it. So when we have the level meetings with the regionals leading it, and then principals hear it out, they get to then message it back to them. It's crucial. Because if you put it out there, it just becomes another document. This is where it's got to be, through those level meetings.
They're doing the work.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And when you want fidelity throughout the system, you you've got to have some type of feedback back to the staff so they understand where they're going and what they have done. And they can come back and say, no, we don't have fidelity as yet, we're working on it. And so that's a good thing. Appreciate it. With that,
That is all.
any other questions for it? No? No? Any other suggestions? Anybody want to lay anything on the table? With that being said, we shall now adjourn this meeting. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Dr. Meisner. Very informative.
That's my final suggestion. What's that? Say my final suggestion is we all go home and have dinner. Oh, That's my suggestion.
I hope we can.
Uh-oh, let's cut the sleep. Uh-oh. Yeah. I didn't know why it blows right here. But I'm often cold. I should dress warmer when I come. Yeah. Probably do a better job. Wearing a sweater.
It's light out, everybody, come home.
I know.
And there's so much power in just being able to.
7:36
One
tonight.
question for both of you.
Kids don't always have that, especially if they come from an environment where there's a lot of
Primary.
and someone who's sad and yelling or screaming at them, they don't understand that's different than being angry and frustrated. So helping us as adults to go, hey, I gotta identify how I'm feeling right now. You know, we do it a lot at my house because my daughter goes, are you mad? I'm like, no, I am frustrated. Nothing different. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever experienced these things, but yes.
I like to see you guys out.